Mr. Castillo is getting here, and Mr. Lawrence may be here. He had a potential working situation that came up that may preclude him from being here. He was not sure, and Ms. Gill is out of town. So, a small group of us tonight. So if you all join me for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. So the first item on the work session agenda tonight we'll be talking about lead testing. And I'll turn it over to Superintendent.
Being here, we're a small but mighty crew tonight, so we've got a few items this evening that we hope to cover and open the floor for questions that you may have. The first topic, as was noted, is the mandatory water testing in public schools. In 2017, you may recall that the General Assembly enacted a Senate Bill 1359, which indicated that all public school divisions need to conduct lead testing in potable water. And so we've asked Mr. Padilla to come and share with the board what our plan is to make sure that we get all of our lead testing done. So I'll turn it over to him. It's okay with you?
Yep. Mr. Padilla.
So the plan that the state, they referenced the U.S. EPA's 3 T's for reducing lead. They were technical guides. So that's what we're referencing. Essentially, we have to test all water sources where you could drink or food prep would take place. All the bubblers, the water fountains, all the kitchen sinks. Those are the priority that you have to test, and then all the other water sources you just do random sampling. So that's what we are going to do. We're working with our vendor to get a final count on all the different ones because there's lots of hidden ones in some of the schools. Right now, I think we're up to about 85 that were mandatory, and then they have to add in the other random ones. But we've contracted with a company called Professional Services Incorporated, PSI of Fairfax, and they're going to test test for lead in all 5 city schools. They're going to use the 3T system, which is the US EPA's guidance, which is training, testing, and then telling. So they're going to help us with training after this for staff, but testing everything that they need to test for potential problems, take corrective actions necessary, and then after the results are in, then we will review them and then present to the board, present to the community, hopefully post online, and hopefully we don't find anything. As you recall, we did some in-house testing, and then Dr. Mecca and Mr. Leahy at the high school with some students also did testing, and we didn't find anything. So we're hopeful we're not going to find anything. But if we do, we'll remediate anything we have to do to make sure we're up to the law. The standard set forth by the EPA is 20 parts per billion for lead, so that's what we're aiming for, or less. We have lunch at Extras, the main update.
Any questions?
Questions? Yeah.
Mr. Reitinger?
Just a quick question. Thank you, Mr. Padilla. That's comprehensive and helpful. How are they going to do Mount Daniel?
Mount Daniel, they're going to test it just like we would test it. We're going to wait probably Mount Daniel. It's not going to probably happen until a few weeks in. The plan is to do all of the schools the first week of school. Mount Daniel might be a week or 2 later. But they're going to test everything else. So the building that's remaining, every classroom has the bubblers, the little water fountains, or the sinks. So they have to test every single one of those. And there's only one water fountain in that remaining building. The sinks in the new trailers don't have bubblers. So we're going to provide just cooler water out there that's filtered. I mean, it's in the bottles. That's not required, but because we're buying that from a company. But that's what we're going to test. And then all the food is not being prepped on site. It's through Revolution Foods. So there won't be any water that we're cooking with.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay.
On to item 2, the discussion on the early entrance to kindergarten. Dr. Newman?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a topic that has it's been, I suppose, cooking for some time, and it's one that I sort of fell into, fortunately, when I arrived here in the City of Falls Church. And we're here tonight really to provide some information. This is not an item for which we're going to ask you to do much with, other than to share some information and take up some questions. There is some background that I wanted to share that was shared with me when I arrived on site. The first is that there were 2 students that had asked for early placement in kindergarten whose birthdays fell after the September 30th cutoff date for entrance to kindergarten. One was asking for entrance this current year, and the other student was asking for next year. Due to timing and a lack of policy from the school board, as the board is aware, the one student who was asking for this current school year was denied entrance. However, we have not discussed or contemplated what a policy would look like with respect to allowing students to enter the City of Falls Church schools before their 5th birthday on September 30th. So tonight, as Ms. High shares some information with you that she's prepared, we have a number of outcomes that I wanted just to describe could occur. One is that the board could ask the staff to walk away from tonight and draft a policy that would delineate how students could access early kindergarten for presentation at a future school board meeting. The board could ask staff not to go forward with this at all because perhaps there isn't the will of the board to consider a policy. Or another option could be that we could get a number of questions that may require further investigation, and we could bring that back at a future work session and then determine whether or not there's will of the board to move forward to develop a policy. My hope, frankly, or not my hope, but my anticipation is that we're going to end up in that 3rd place where there's going to be some questions that are going to come up, and perhaps we are going to need to go back and gather some more information and then come back to a future work session to talk about it again. Some things that I want to just sort of put on your radar, if you will, to consider as we talk about this at a pretty high level tonight, is that, or things that I am considering in terms of this future decision is, one, what does the Virginia Code say about whether or not students can enter kindergarten before their 5th birthday, if it's after September 30th? What are some of the characteristics, qualities that indicate what is kindergarten ready? What is the end game, so to speak? In other words, the notion of acceleration to what end? What are we trying to achieve by getting students to the end of high school earlier than perhaps their other peers? And the last to sort of consider in all of this, and perhaps this is a conversation for tonight or not, but it's around fairness and equity and providing access for all of our students who would potentially be able to access kindergarten early. So I just want to kind of put those out there as some things that can serve potentially as a filter or a conversation point. As a point, if it pleases the chair, we'd like to turn it over to Ms. High to talk a little bit about the materials that she prepared for this evening's work session.
Ms. High?
Good evening. The Code of Virginia, 22.1-199 states that the kindergarten program in each school division shall include a program suitable for children who reach the age of 5, as Dr. Noonan said, by September 30th. But the code also states that children whose birthdays occur between October 1st and December 31st of the school year may be enrolled in kindergarten after appropriate readiness evaluation have been demonstrated for these programs. So we looked at 2 options for assessments, if that would be the will of the board, that could assess students. There is one program that is through George Mason University, which is a kindergarten screening that looks at cognitive skills and different abilities. And then there's also one through MindWell, which was another program that has a Northern Virginia Center office that looks at readiness for kindergarten as well. The next piece that I looked at is what are surrounding school divisions doing, and do they allow early entrance into kindergarten before the age of 5? Arlington, no. Fairfax, no. Alexandria does have a policy that doesn't automatically enroll kids, but it is at the discretion of the school board. Alexandria's policy says it's on a case by case, and that if a student, is allowed to enter, it could be that family could be charged tuition for that, but that is a case by case for Alexandria. Loudon and Prince William both say no to early entrance. As I was doing additional research, I found an article that, it's good for both parents and school personnel to take a look at. And this article talked about the 8 important areas that affect children's transition to kindergarten. And they would be knowledge, their ability to identify numbers, letters, ideas, social adjustment. Are they really ready to be in large groups and be able to respond appropriately to the teacher? The skills, are they able to hold pencils correctly? Are they able to, progress as it's needed for the students who are already age 5? Disposition, their attitude towards school, rules, expectations of behavior and actions, physical attributes, their age and physical health, family interactions, the family interactions with the school or the educational environment, what actually is happening at the school. Things that, from staff perspective that we should consider or the board should consider is the number of students who would be eligible for early entrance if the school board were to provide a waiver. The impact on the enrollment in our class size policy. If families were to take advantage of this option and met the testing requirements, could we or would we exceed our class size policy? Again, looking at social and emotional growth, developmental issues with the curriculum, certain grade levels. There may be FLE curriculum that students are being exposed at a certain grade level. Are students who are younger, are they ready and at a cognitive level or emotional level to handle those topics? One of the things that I do want to highlight for our teachers, that they do differentiate for our students when they come into kindergarten. If we have students who come who may need extra support, and we differentiate for them, but we do have students who do come who are already need acceleration, and we do that for them as well. We do have JTP, Jesse Thackeray Preschool. That is a 4-year option. Of course, not every student can get in. We do have a wait list at JTP. And then the last piece of data that I pulled is actually our enrollment over the last 2 years, and looked at dates of if students could enter kindergarten. October 1st, October 31st. For the 15-16 school year, there would have been 14 students. This past school year, 16-17, there would have been 12 students who would have been eligible and met that date requirement. Do you have something?
Find your data, I'm sorry.
Okay. And then as far as if it were entrance date between October 1st and November 30th, in 2015-16, there would have been 32 students, 16-17, 25 students. And then if we go the entire extension from October 1st through December 31st, 15-16 could have been potentially 49 students or 42 students. So that's information that I've just gathered this far, and I'm sure you'll have questions, and we can answer questions if we have more additional answers, or can get more data for you. And we're gonna add.
I was going to add, sorry, I
Sorry, I
interrupted you
talk
there,
really
Ms. Love.
fast.
No, you're great. I know Mr. Lawrence is hoping he can make it to the meeting, but he did have a work event come up, and he had asked me a question earlier in the day that might be on y'all's mind, so I wanted to share that. He'd looked at the code section that Lisa cited, 22.1.199, that talks about schools can enroll students whose birthdays are between the October 1st and the December 31st deadline if they have the appropriate readiness. I went back, looked at that code section, talked to our folks. That section does apply if we had a preschool program that was universal. So right now we have JTP, that's not universal for all students who are residents of the division, and our special education students are there free of charge, but there are tuition students, as Lisa mentioned, there's a wait list, so it's not available for all students. The board can adopt a policy that would have a different cutoff or would allow an exception anytime in that window if the board wanted to go through till October 31st or November 30th or December 31st. But at least section C of Virginia Code 22.1.199 doesn't require the board at this point to consider students, since we do not have, the language in the code is a 2-tier junior or pre-kindergarten program or a pre-first grade, a transitional first grade program, and the division at this time does not offer that type of program. While we do have JTP as an option for some students, it's not the universal program that the code refers to.
Okay, thank you.
Are there questions for Sam?
I'm curious, has there been, how much demand has there been in the past? I mean, if you know, I don't know, the last year, couple of years or 3 years, how many requests have come in?
I believe these have been the only two that I'm aware of. And it was one for this coming year, and then one.
And is the testing, is that picked up by the school system or the parents?
That would be a decision for the school board if that was
Okay, so
something
there's
that.
not a
I mean, of course, there is a charge, but
do you know what the cost is?
I don't know, but I can.
Okay.
I have
Mr. Ratner.
several questions, but I want to wait till after Mr. Ankuma and Ms. Ward ask. So, a few thoughts and some questions, Ms. High. I'm not as worried about the effect on enrollment because it seems to me that if you have a certain number of kids each year, you have a bump that first year as you have a few more students in kindergarten, and that bump kind of follows along, and afterward, there's a drop off to match the bump because you have some of the people who would be in kindergarten who'd be in first grade. So it's kind of a one-time thing that percolates through the school system, and once it gets to the end, it's all done. And I'm not sure that would be a statistically significant amount of kids. It might be, but it would, one, introduce some variability that would be hard to plan for. I'm interested. Do we know anything about the surrounding school systems and why they allow it or don't allow it? One of the things that concerns me is it's easy to say we ought to be able to do this because there are some kids that could easily be kindergarten even though they're born in September or perhaps October. But you've got to draw the line somewhere. And if you go to October, then why not go to November? If you go to November, then why not go to December? And there are some kids who could clearly do it, but there may be some kids who are more borderline, who maybe there's some pressure to do it or not do it. And I worry about the one, drawing a line just farther down the road when it's not necessary. And two, about the kids who can pass the tests, they're academically qualified, but for some other reason are not as emotionally ready to proceed. And so I think I worry a little bit about the disruption for the kids and the disruption for the school system in terms of ability to plan, and perhaps a little bit, although this may be the least important part, about the burden of just administering such a program. Because the bigger school systems, while they would have more kids to worry about, could do it much more easily than we can. And we're exceedingly thinly staffed in the central office. Even if we outsource the testing and contract with a private provider to do it, that doesn't mean that there's no requirement internally. And we're tightly enough resourced, particularly in the central office. I'm concerned about taking on more voluntary duties, even when in some cases they're clearly called for. So I think there's several questions sort of bound up in that series of statements. So rather than kind of pull them out, can you sort of react to what I was saying?
I mean, all of those are really good points and things to consider. I mean, the first thing I would do is go back and try to reach out directly with some of the surrounding school divisions and the instructional officers to see, how their decisions are being made. I agree, yes, central office is thinly staffed, and, it may be, internally requirements of staff, but we will do what we need to do if it's something that we need to do.
If the board feels this is the right thing to do, I'd very much at least like to try to reach out to Alexandria, since they have a program, and it would be interesting, and hopefully not take too much effort to find out what their experience is. I know you found out what the guidelines are, but how many people they've admitted, what the criteria are, what the burden is, so that we can make an effective judgment. And in particular, do they have kids that get admitted but then have a problem when they're in the classroom? That would all be
And also,
interesting.
do they really
data.
charge tuition? That would be, their board, their policy allows for that, but is that their practice? We want to know that probably as well.
Ms. Ward?
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on what Ms. Reitinger was bringing up. Have there ever been any studies done of the developmental process of these students who are admitted early to kindergarten? There's some students they might be developmentally advanced at that point in their life, but that does catch up with them at some point. It could, maybe it doesn't. But I'm thinking like in second, third, or fourth grade, these younger students, are they struggling at that point? Do you know if there's been anything?
I mean, and with anything, you can find a study for, you can find a study against. I mean, there's lots of information out there that will give you, yes, this is the right thing to do, no, this isn't the correct thing to do. I mean, I can look for, pros and cons
I don't want
and
to
share
give you
that back
extra
to you.
stuff to do, but I just didn't know.
But I
if
mean,
you-
I've looked at several articles and it really bounced back as far as, this is the right thing to do if, parents feel they're ready, if they've gone to preschool, then maybe it's the right thing to do, but there have been just as many that said, give kids time, allow them to enter, when they're 5 or older, 5.5 or older, so that they are prepared and they are more at the top of their class a lot of times rather than just being able to be there in the middle or, sometimes struggling when they get to older grade levels.
I think it's a good question, though, that we should sort of wrestle with is what kind of longitudinal study is out there that sort of indicate what the long-term effects are. I suspect, as Ms. High said, you could probably find studies on both sides, but I don't know if there's one that's been vetted in a top-tier journal. So let us take a look for that too.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? One thing I wanted to do, just to acknowledge that, and forgive me if I'm pronouncing the name incorrectly, Cosbelt?
That's correct.
Did provide some comments for us tonight that I did forward out to the board, so that they can have that as part of, the staff can have it as part of their research that they're going to be doing over the next few weeks, of bringing us back some additional information. For me, I agree, wanting to get some additional information about it. And then also, are there, we looked at our peers here in the area, but are there any other jurisdictions in the Commonwealth that potentially have that type of policy?
We do have, there is one, I think it's Bristol, Virginia,
Okay.
that does have a policy. I think I printed that. Bristol, Virginia School Board will consider the admittance of children who have not reached the age of 5 by September 30th. They have to request in writing. The child must be evaluated, and they have their school psychologists do it within the zone where the child resides. And then the evaluating person makes recommendations to the superintendent and designee. And for them, no tuition will be charged to children who are approved to attend kindergarten. And Tricia had found this policy for us, and the one from Bristol. And
Yes.
Can you speak to me?
Yeah, it's my understanding, sorry to step out there. Bristol City is located next to a county in North Carolina that allows students to have early admission, and they didn't want students who might move from one county line across one street to another to not be able to be admitted. So they have a policy. It's different than Alexandria's. They made clear that no tuition will be charged to the students who are approved to attend kindergarten. And the evaluation is done by their school psychologist into whether it's appropriate for the student to begin kindergarten early. They do outline in their policy the areas that are assessed: cognitive, language, gross motor, fine motor, social, emotional, and self-help. So it's nice to know what else is out there if that's something that this board is leaning towards that other schools in Virginia have done. But this is the only policy that I know of, and that the school board attorney for the Virginia School Board Association knows of, where another state other than Alexandria allows another county allows early admission.
And for me, I definitely, I would like get additional information from Alexandria, and they're the closest of what they have seen coming in with having the policy, and if they've seen an influx of potential students and parents wanting to start their students on the early side of kindergarten, just to kind of get an idea of what their experience has been with the policy. And as I think it's right here in the middle, do they actually, policy says they allow for the tuition drive, do they actually do that or not? And then the other thing for Ms. Minson, Bristol and Bristol, Tennessee, were right across the street from each other.
That makes sense,
Bristol,
yes.
one side of the street's Virginia, the other side is Tennessee.
I
Little
should've-
geography that
I
part
should
of
have
the state,
realized I
know.
drove through Bristol on my way to Lee County every single weekend the year I lived there, so it's a fun trip.
So can I make sure I got the questions?
Yes.
And Lisa, you can kind of fill me in too, because one is around testing. Who picks up the cost? What is the cost? Why do or don't other jurisdictions engage in early kindergarten? What would the disruption be potentially for the students and planning and administration of the program? And then would there be undue burden, for example, on central office, even if we contracted out for the assessment? Is there any longitudinal study out there that identifies long-range outcomes for kids that have worked through this? What did I miss? What did I miss?
And then Alexandria.
And then we'll definitely reach out to
How
Alexandria
many students are admitted?
and find out how many students have been admitted, do they charge tuition, what is the tuition, and the like.
And if they know information on the impact of those students.
Mr. Lawrence and Mr. Castillo just came in and wanted to give you all the opportunity to ask questions, because we have had some back and forth, but give you all the opportunity to ask any questions for the staff that you all may, or add to their list of research and questions.
Okay. Sorry, as Trish probably told you, stuck in the elevator. So, do we have numbers for kids who are redshirted and held back a year? Because I hadn't really focused on that until, this.
At any point in time? At any point in time, or
Well,
just
I mean,
in kindergarten?
We're just really talking about kindergarten, because it is one thing to say, you have so many kids who would be eligible to start early, but then what we've also got is kids who are almost mandated to start in 1 year because they've been held back. And I'm just curious, because what it comes down to is, if we can make having room part of our assessment on whether or not we let somebody come in early, but we also need to know how many people are holding back so that it artificially makes the next year's number bigger, and that we have absolutely no option.
When you say held back, do you mean repeating kindergarten? Or
No, I mean,
No, I
basically,
think
how many people
starting
how many kids
kindergarten.
are eligible for kindergarten, and they're close, and their parents say, honestly, I'd rather have them wait a year.
Sure.
I can have that data pulled to see how many current first graders who are going to first grade this year would be 6 before September 30th. I can pull that information from our system.
Right, yeah, because it just hadn't occurred to me that, if parents do that, then you're automatically, artificially changing the next school year. You don't have any choice about admitting them because they could have come in 1 year and they absolutely have to really go in the next year.
We can look into that.
Mr. Castillo?
Let's push that together. Let's not do that on this.
Yeah, not now.
I have some personal experience. Our eldest daughter had a September 3rd birthday, and she was going to private school at the time, and they said it's got to be before September 1st. So 2 days is as good as 6 months or 9 months. So some of these things seem arbitrary. That being said, it seems in my experience, and I could be wrong, that back in the olden days, before the internet, when we went to school, you had younger ages starting, and you'd also have people skipping a grade. It seems to me that doesn't happen as much, and that you do see a general trend towards children being at the age or maybe slightly older, as Mr. Lawrence was suggesting. Is there some pedagogical reason why that has happened, or is it just some accident of culture where maybe some people have read Blink and they realize their kids will be better hockey players if they start a year later, or
You mean outliers?
outliers?
And before,
He writes too many books.
before Dr. Newman answers, yeah, I agree with you, because back in where now is that September 30, I was a kid that started school, and I was October, where now, many years later, my nephew is a November birthday, and he did have to, as you say, sit out a year because it wasn't my sister held him back, but because of because of the calendar did hold him back. So it is. I do wonder what changed that, because I had a friend who was way later in of birthdays who was like a late December, maybe even New Year's birthday, and started school with me. So it has definitely evolved from being a little bit more kind of open up.
And then a second, I'm sorry.
One, I think there are two things that have happened that potentially could speak to your question about the cohorting of kids. One is I think there's an awful lot of research out there that suggests that holding kids back is not a good idea. It doesn't do there's no value to it. Kids don't learn better by louder, slower, and one more year of the same. So I think there's a lot of what might be called social promotion, but I don't think it's social promotion, and I think that's the pedagogy question that you're getting to in many ways. I think that we have become much better as a school organization nationally on how do we intervene on behalf of kids in a timely, tailored way by name and by need to help support them in very different ways than we have in the past. So I think that you're seeing, for example, numbers of kids that need credit recovery or remediation at the end of a school year across the country dropping. And the reason for that is because there's a differentiation of instruction and a scaffolding of instruction that's happening in each of the classrooms to support kids in different ways. So my guess, and it's purely conjecture, is that we are getting better at instructing a very diverse community of people. And as a consequence of that, we're helping kids meet needs in a very different way. And then in terms of holding kids back, I think there's an awful lot of research out there now that says, holding kids back is not good. I don't know if there's an equivalent of accelerating kids, but I do know where we're seeing acceleration from a pedagogical standpoint is you don't have to be a freshman in high school to take Algebra 1 anymore. You take Algebra 1 if you're eligible in even 6th grade or 7th grade. So we're offering a very differentiated curriculum also at different grade levels when kids need it and when we can meet their needs at that grade level, as opposed to accelerating them because everybody knows, well, algebra is in 9th grade. Well, not anymore. Algebra is from starting in 6th grade all the way up to we're teaching algebra to some 10th graders and 11th graders.
Well, and that reminds me, another thing I've heard parents say is that, I don't think they use the exact phrase, but they say that kindergarten is harder than it used to be. There seems to be a lot more stuff that our children learn in kindergarten that we were learning in 1st grade. And so maybe there's been some matching of changes and trends that nets it out. I don't know. But that raises another question with respect to cohorting and identifying abilities. I mean, right now it seems with kindergarten, all we have is the calendar, right? You're on one side or the other. So how do we know who's ready when? And that seems to be one of the big questions right now.
So in terms of when we get kids based on the calendar, there is a significant number of assessments that we do with our kindergarten kids to see where they are, sort of benchmark testing, if you will, whether it's the PALS or other assessments. And then from there, we're able to, again, sort of differentiate to meet the needs. And we'll start putting kids in different places based on their needs at that moment. Those groups are flexible, they're always moving. But the idea is to get all the kids up to the highest level. I don't know if that's responsive to your question or not, but I do think that there's an awful lot of assessment that goes on at the kindergarten level when students first come in to be diagnostic to determine where they are.
But it does beg the question of when they start kindergarten. I mean, at this point, they start when they start, and then you do this sort.
Sure.
And one last question, and you all have to tell my wife that I asked this question, because she's been telling me to ask this question. And that is in Arlington, at least somewhere, at least in one school, they'll have a blended kindergarten, 1st grade, or they'll have a class, I think, of different ages, which they then sort as needed. And is that kind of a variation on this theme that is worth looking at, or is that not operationally very feasible? But it's an interesting variation on that.
There was a time, and I want to say it was a decade ago, that multi-age classrooms were sort of in vogue.
That would be better.
Kind of comes and goes. I think that there's some real value socially for kids to have mixed age and multi-age. Academically, we're sort of moving kids around and flexibly grouping them for different purposes, so I don't know that it's necessarily important to have them with other grade levels, because we're teaching above grade level content to kids within a particular classroom, whether they're with that particular grade level or not. So I think that there are still a number of schools that have some multi-age classrooms. I think that's waned rather significantly over the last 5 years, 6 years or so.
That's it for me, thank you.
You can tell her, I'll tell you.
Just one thing occurred to me. Is there anything about PYP that all would play into this in terms of assessing or having an opinion on this, or is this really too far down?
PYP talks about making sure that students are able to be inquirers and all of the learner profiles. So I don't know that specifically early interest to kindergarten or allowing students to come in early would play a factor into the actual PYP. Once they get here, we're teaching them to be critical thinkers.
Yeah, because who's more curious than a 4-year-old?
Yeah, PYP at kindergarten is like the poster child for IB, because you got risk takers, you've got critical thinkers, you've got problem solvers, you've got, as you said, creativity, open-mindedness. It's as they get older that we don't infuse those skills as well. Okay. But will be.
Any other questions for anyone?
So then may I ask, in terms of the next step, what I'd like to do is, with the staff, go back and answer as many of these questions as we can, and at a future work session, come back with some of those answers, and then sort of make a decision at that point about whether or not we want to proceed with the development of a policy, what that policy might look like, or if the will of the board is, we've heard enough, we just don't think we want to go there. So it's kind of a binary decision at that point, I think.
And I think that's what, at least with head nodding, I think that is what we would like for you to do a little bit additional work and research on this and bring it back to us at a future work sessions, present that, and then I believe at that point we'll make the decision of moving forward with a policy and or how the policy may look for us if we decide to move forward and make a decision. Right. Mr. Sia?
And Dr. Noonan, you'll provide your recommendations.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. We're going to move on to conversation about the triennial work plan.
Great. Let me kind of get my stuff together here. First of all, I want to sort of harken back to a conversation that we had the last work session. Let me orient you to the materials you have in front of you first. You have the Falls Church City Public Schools Triennial Plan FY 18-19. This is the one-page document that we shared with you a month ago at the work session. We didn't receive any feedback from anybody about this, so we're presuming based on that you guys were pretty good with the way that this one-pager looked, and it sort of met your needs as a board. So what we've done then, and this is the other material that you have, is the work plan for the triennial plan 2017-2020, is we took each of the priorities, and again, just in terms of communication and trying to be as crystal clear as I can with communication for clarity, what we are calling the major headings on the one-pager are priorities. So we've got priority 1, which is student-centered teaching and learning. Priority 2 is excellent staff. Priority 3 is optimal facilities and learning environments. Priority 4 is fiscal management. And priority 5 is community engagement. We took each of those priorities, and then underneath those are the bullets, which now are our strategies to, yes sir?
Sorry, why do we have 2 different dates on triennial plans? 18, 20. I didn't know if one was school year, fiscal year, or...
No, that's an error.
Okay.
It should be, on the Falls Church Public Schools Triennial Plan, it should be 18, yeah.
Okay.
So, my apologies for that.
No.
All right. So then what we did is we took these strategies And we developed a line item or a work plan for each of these strategies under each of the priorities. So what I'd like to do tonight is, as best I can, and this is a little bit like watching sausage get made, I think, is sort of try to show you the alignment between this document, the work plan, and show you how it was developed, how it was set up, and then from there, give you a chance to ask some questions, either about any substantive questions that you may have off the bat of the triennial plan itself from the work plan, and if there's any sort of overarching structural questions that you might have. Because as you're looking at it, this is going to look remarkably different, I think, than what you've had in the past, or maybe not. Maybe it isn't remarkably different. So with that, let me ask you, and we're going to kind of try to.
Sorry, don't interrupt, but just a quick prefatory question. Was there anything in the emerging assessment results that would cause us to alter any of this?
Good question. There's one area that I think we just need to sort of double down on, and that is special populations. And so you'll see, and that's special ed ESOL in particular. So the other part of this that's going to happen is we're going to set 3 overarching instructional goals that we're going to be working with all of our principals and all of our teachers on for this current school year. And one of them is going to be around special populations and how we work with our special needs students, how we work with our special and our ESOL kids. That was an emerging thing that came from the data that we just received today, actually. So let me also say, this was sorry to back up just for a second, but this was a really, I think, powerful opportunity for our staff to engage in. This is imperfect. Remember, we're thinking about 1.5 as opposed to 2.0, which would be a full-blown strategic planning process. But what made this most powerful, I think, was that it began at a retreat with our district leadership team about a month and a half ago. And the engagement of the entire central office, including all of our department leadership, Sevi, Padilla, Nancy Henderson, Richard Kane, I mean, everyone has been involved in this, including the principals and a number of teacher leaders. So, and the team that's here tonight. So this was not done, and I share that just to say it wasn't done in isolation. This was done broadly across the division, and we're very pleased with sort of what's emerging from this, because I think it gives us a better opportunity to really be clear about where we're going and what we're trying to accomplish here in the City of Falls Church Schools. So if you wouldn't mind flipping over to page 1. And it says Priority 1, Student-Centered Teaching and Learning. And that's the blue bar. And the pink bar is the first strategy. So if you cross-reference that first strategy with the one-pager, you'll see the first bullet under Student-Centered Teaching and Learning is ensuring equity of access to quality core instructional programs and resources for all students. The algorithm or the process by which we developed this plan was that there are, underneath the strategy, work items that will support that particular strategy. So you'll see down the left-hand side, 1.1.1 is to provide all students with access to technology, books, food, and resources as necessary. Then we asked the staff and the folks that we were working with to skip the colored code bar for just a second, was to think about what is your evidence of effectiveness? Is there a statement that you can make that sort of indicates what the current state is here in FCCPS? Then we asked the staff and the folks we were working with to say, okay, if that's our current state, what is the ideal? So the third large block is the evidence of effectiveness or the ideal state. And then we asked to determine who's responsible for making that happen, what is an initiation timeline, and what is our completion date. So in this first one, we have as the evidence that we do provide an internet hotspot and access to technology, classroom, books, food, transportations, and fees as needed to all of our students. But the ideal state is that all students are provided with all of those things. That is the responsibility of the principals and other appropriate staff. That could be social workers, psychologists, school counselors, the like. We will engage in that immediately in September of 2017. It will go on for as long as it's sustainable. And our current rating is green. We see it as already in place. It's something that's happening now that we're pretty proud of. The next one down, 1.1.2, is a yellow. And again, it's just another indicator or another piece of the strategy. 1.1.3, and if you continue to work down and flip over to page 3, you'll see we have 5 action steps that fall under that particular strategy. Does just the document itself sort of make sense to you? It's sort of how it was put together? Okay. So there's a couple of them that I want to call out to you just because I want to make sure that we're sort of tracking in the same direction. So strategy 1.2, which if you crosswalked it, you would see it says ensure all students develop critical thinking and creative problem-solving skills through the International Baccalaureate programs. So 1.2.2 says follow principles and practices of the IB program. That means that the evidence of effectiveness would be that all, and the ideal state would be that all curriculum and learning experiences connect to the IB program. And that's for all students, right? Regardless of whether you're an ESOL student, a special needs student, whether you're in poverty, whether you're wealthy, whether you're in an IB class or an honors class or a standard level class, you're going to have access to those infused skills that are associated with the IB program. We need to resolve all of the matters to be addressed, which is a document that we received from IB, and also the recommendations that we receive from IB to maintain authorization at each level every 5 years, and then those recommendations will be incorporated into the school's action plans that they're working on. That one is going to be the responsibility of the coordinators, the collaborative teams. It's going to be ongoing, and we're going to follow up with our next IB visit in 2021. So we will continue to monitor that very closely. The reason I wanted to call that one out is that I think it's incredibly integrated into who we are, just as a school division. I think it's been evident through all the conversations that I've had an opportunity to have that the IB program and the learner profile is something that we really want to hang our hat on. And so that became part of the plan. Let me ask you now just to sort of flip over, not sort of, but to flip over to page 5. Just as another example, page 5, 1.4.2 is to train all professional staff to meet the needs of special populations using research-based practice. Our current state is that we have participated in training, a variety of trainings and research-based practices to meet the needs of special populations. Specialists have trained some staff, but general education teachers would benefit from more training around how to work with special needs students and ESOL students. So our ideal state here is that we are going to engage all of our professional staff and our administrators in ongoing professional development about special populations and their needs, and long-term research-based practices to meet the needs of the learner profile. And our collaborative teams, so those are teams of teachers that are coming together and like content, and individual teachers will have access to professional development on differentiation of instruction. In other words, how do I meet the needs of all the kids in my class? Effective Tier 1 instructional strategies. And if I'm using terminology that is unfamiliar or you think needs to be sort of reviewed, I would also, we'd like that feedback as well, because we want this to be a public document.
Mr. Stan?
What's Tier 1 instructional strategy mean?
Thank you. So if you consider a triangle, if you will, and the bottom tier would be Tier 1. There's 3 tiers. Tier 1 on the bottom, Tier 2 in the middle, Tier 3 at the top. Tier 1 is where 100% of our students are. In other words, every single student that we serve falls into Tier 1. It's the place where we provide the best instructional strategies, we provide high levels of critical thinking and rigor, we provide intervention as necessary in the classroom to meet the kids' needs that we have. We know how to scaffold instruction or provide building blocks for kids to achieve high levels of learning. And we also know how to differentiate. So we know, for example, that we have some kids that if we differentiate by content, process, or product, we might ask them to do a different product or project than another student where they're actually looking at their strengths. That all happens in Tier 1. If students aren't successful in Tier 1 in our multi-tiered system of support here in FCCPS, then a student might move into Tier 2. which means that they need some extra time and support to get some help so that they can be successful in Tier 1. So they might go out and they might meet with a specialist. They might get a special reading program, level literacy initiative. They might go to some other pull-out kind of program. And if students aren't successful in Tier 2, then they would go into Tier 3. So think sort of RICU, right? Reading ICU. These are kids that need really intensive help reading, but their Tier 1 teacher isn't able to provide that with the depth and complexity necessary in that first tier. So it's an ascending level of intervention for kids, but in Tier 1, that's where 100% of our kids start. And we should never have more than 15% that need Tier 2. And of that 15%, we should never have more than 5% in Tier 3. Which means that if we have really high quality Tier 1 instruction, we're meeting the needs of all of our kids in the classroom. Does that make sense?
Mr. Castillo?
So Tier 3 is 5% of the 15?
Yes. Yeah.
And is that across the school population, or is that inclusive, or is that general ed versus special ed? It's just
My opinion, it should be across the board for everyone. And my take on it is if you have more than 15% in Tier 2 and more than 5% in Tier 3, we don't have an intervention problem. We have a what happens in the classroom every day problem. So we really want to hone in on that first tier core instruction to really engage teachers in what are the best practices? How do we teach? How do we meet the needs of multiple levels of kids within a single classroom? And so we're going to spend a lot of time in this plan developing teachers around how to provide quality instruction. And the truth of it is, in my opinion, is that we could stand and deliver a curriculum to our teachers to say, here's what best practice is, but the best professional development that our teachers are going to get are from each other. So really leveraging the really high quality instruction that's happening in our schools with our new teachers and teachers that may be struggling or need some extra help. Really, if we can engage our best quality teachers to support them, that's where we're going to get the most bang for our buck.
So where are our numbers now relative to that?
We have some baselining we need to do around this plan. We have not done that, but through a conversation and anecdotal information, the principals and the central office and many of our teachers really felt like this was something that needed some support. All right, so let me scoot you ahead to page 6. And there are a couple of things in here under 1.5. Utilizing digital tools when they enhance learning outcomes for students. We believe that our current state is that technology focuses on ways to use technology and foster creativity, collaboration, communication, critical thinking, and it matches nicely with the approaches to learning and the IB Learner Profile. But we also believe that one of the things that we need to do really gets into 1.5.2, which is provide professional development for our teachers on how best to use technology. Because I think what has happened based on the anecdotal information that I've gotten is that there have been some really nice tools put in the hands of students and teachers, but not necessarily the training necessary to be able to use those tools successfully. And so we, pardon?
It's to the fullest extent.
To the fullest extent possible. So yeah, we definitely want to spend some time working on that. All right, so flipping over then to page 7, I've got a few just I want to share with you just so you can kind of see where our heads were. Excellent staff. The first strategy is attract, hire, train, and retain an exceptional diverse staff to meet the needs of all students. One area that's red for us is to attract a diverse staff to reflect the composition of our student body. So our current state is that HR and leadership team members do currently attend career fairs at JMU, UVA, and other Virginia institutions. Those are not always the most target-rich environments when we're trying to gather a diverse workforce. So we are going to, our ideal state is to establish a process to attract and recruit diverse staff by targeting historically Black colleges and universities, Hispanics serving institutions of higher education, and non-traditional programs like career switchers to bring in folks that more adequately represent what our school population looks like. And that is something that will start in the spring of 18, and that will be ongoing. And that's the time when we start to recruit.
And that's one thing, when we discussed this a little bit at our leadership meeting, I discussed, and because as most of you know, I work at HBCU, and I did mention that we have a great teaching program there, and would like to work with central office to be able to expand that type of opportunity to give those students, because the majority of the teaching students, and I talked with our person who oversees the career services office today, and essentially what happens with a lot of the students there, they do their practicum teaching in Prince George's County. Prince George's County kind of gives them a tentative offer at that point, so when it comes to career fair times, they kind of just go into Prince George's, where jurisdictions like ours and others may miss out on that opportunity to do that. So I think us working with not only where I work at, but some of the others here in Virginia, to give them opportunities to come into a school system that is high performing, and give them those opportunities there, I think will be good not only for them as doing their student teaching, but also good for our students to actually give a little bit more cultural diversity within the classroom for them that they currently have.
You do raise a point that I want to sort of draw your attention to, and that's in 2.1.2, which is interview, hire, and process candidates through HR as soon as positions become available. I'm interested in our ideal state in looking for ways that we can offer early contracts to people in critical need areas, so that when we're out recruiting at the multitude of places that we go, if we come across a candidate that's excellent, we'd also like to be in a position where we can offer a candidate a tentative contract right on the spot, so that we don't lose that person as well. And that's something we'll be working with Human Resources and our attorney with as well.
Just Reiniger?
So in the area that I work, that's very common. You know, people do interviews, and you just get, actually, they're not tentative though, because the school board doesn't have to approve it. You go to a career fair, people will talk to you, and they'll give you an offer and sign you on the spot, because it's difficult enough to get people that they do that. And teaching is a place where I think that's true. So whatever, if you need additional policy to get greater flexibility to move quickly, while still keeping all of the background checks we would need to do to make sure we're getting the right people, I think that's something I'd be certainly willing to discuss.
Great. Yeah, definitely the safeguards would remain in place.
So,
Yeah.
on the, it says here sufficient staffing to ensure timely hiring. Do we have sufficient staffing?
Well, there are a couple of things that I feel like we need to do with this plan after it's adopted, or in the process of it being adopted. One is that we do need to do some benchmarking to determine where are we exactly. And I also think that we need to look at what to monetize it somehow, and figure out what is the cost of doing some of these things going to be. Because if these are our priorities, and these are indeed the things that we need to take a look at, it then begins to drive our budgetary decision-making process as well. So when we come to you, if we're short on staff to do some of these things that we want to do, we may be cutting staff elsewhere to provide something that's more aligned to what our plan is. But I would sort of defer that question to Ms. High, and that is there sufficient staff currently to do that?
I utilize our principals and assistant principals to help recruit. It's usually me and our administrators, but whenever they go recruiting with me, that means they're not in the building. So I would say we're not as staffed as we probably should be. We make it work.
You're going to hear that a lot, and probably have heard that a lot for many, many years. We make it work. And we are a small, and thank you for recognizing how small our central office staff is. We're a small but mighty central office staff, and I think that there's some opportunity for us to really build capacity in our leadership in the school buildings differently too. So when we do take our principals on these recruiting fair trips, it opens up an opportunity for an assistant principal to sit in the principal's chair. It also opens up an opportunity for a teacher to sit in the assistant principal's chair. So all of this sort of woven together creates really great opportunity, I think, for everybody.
If I could just follow up on your point about monetizing this, I think that's important because, you know, right now our budget and this plan are a little out of sync. I mean, they're not disjointed or at war, but I did notice that some of this should telegraph to the budget season. For example, the note about classes being redlining pretty much in terms of size is a huge issue, and I think it's one we're gonna have to face head on.
That's a good point. So,
One good point.
So, I think I'm agreeing and supplementing what Mr. Castillo just said. You know, what you're talking about is exactly the way a strategic planning process ought to work in my mind, which is you have the strategic plan, you've got the work plan, and then that informs the budget and the activity from that. So it's a big circle that goes around. And you know, ideally, you know, in certainly version 2, but even in 1.5, this sort of document will drive what we do in budget season. And we ought to be able to look at anything we're considering, well, almost anything we're considering in your proposed budget for next year, and you know, not be able to map it, but it ought to be driven by what's in the work plan and the strategic plan. So, you know, the more what we do can translate in that way, which means the more precision, so we can define what we're going to do based on this plan, I think the more helpful it will be. And I think it's a great step forward.
thank you. We have, and I think that's been a huge value in the conversations with our school leaders as well. Just in terms of putting together just asking the question, what is the filter by which you make decisions when you do your site-based budgeting process? And the answers we got back were varied. None were bad, but they were quite varied. And so one of the things that I am committed to is creating alignment in our system, from the school board, the superintendent, the central office, to our schools, to our teachers, to our community, and back up. And I think if we can fall on a document like this one pager and say, okay, map that decision however you can, you know, loosely or directly back to this, because what we're trying to do is sort of put our resources where our values are, the better. And so we've spent some good time with that. And I think in the end, what it's done with our school leaders is it's sort of emboldened them in some ways to say, okay, at least we know now, not that they didn't before, but with pretty good clarity that these are the things we care about. And so so we've had those conversations already with staff to say, okay, now as you think about your budget, let's align it here.
And in some of those conversations, when we've talked about someone will say, well, that would have a budget implication. And we talk about it and say, yes, we should put that in, or no, that's not something we feel like we should put in. So we're doing some of that as a meeting. We're down to a smaller group.
Just a couple more I want to share with you. Page 11, 3.1.3 says complete yearly mandatory training for all staff. As you know, we have to do bloodborne pathogens and health training, first aid, AED, EpiPen, you know, on and on, FERPA, FOIA, Title IX, mental health, etc. And currently our staff participates in mandatory training in person or online, but some support and operations staff are not being included in some trainings, which is a gap. So our perfect world, or our ideal state, is that we make sure we have everybody on our staff doing that this year. And Lisa, do you want to talk about, or Tricia, do you want to talk about what we're doing to make that happen? It's yellow, but we're excited about it being green this time next year.
Lisa has found a program called Safe Schools that we are going to be using this upcoming year that has a lot of modules and a lot of these trainings available. The login will be for school staff the same as their login for their computer, so there's no question about their ability to get on and to see these modules. And there will be reminders to make sure that the modules, the videos are completed. All of the videos have a test afterwards that tests the material to make sure the teachers didn't just watch the video, but learned what was shared and what the expectations are. And then we'll have a record of every single teacher when they took the test, that they passed the test. We can follow up with teachers who struggled with some of the areas. And there will be no question that a teacher who's hired, if there's a teacher who comes in mid-year, that they've received all the mandatory training. If there's a custodial staff, they have the training. So we'll have a record when the training was received, that it was received, and then a record of what that training actually was, which is something that is crucial for us to have, and we did have some holes in the past, and we won't going forward.
And one of the reports that Safe Schools also gives us is how long did it take the individual to complete the module. So if it's, and it says this should take you about this amount of time. So we're able to actually see a report that something that may have should have taken 20 minutes, only took you 5 minutes, we'll know that we need to probably follow up with that individual to say.
What's a blood more?
Really watch.
Yeah. I mean, it's just doesn't mean I have to look at the report, but it
But
is available.
this was just an example of how we're moving through it.
I assume this is sort of generally applicable training in the safe schools. It's not in any way customized
There-
to us.
It's both. There's general training that we've reviewed and we think is appropriate and acceptable and meets the levels that we require, but we can also upload our own videos, our own policies, our own handbook, and teachers can be tested on that, check off that they've read it, that they accept the terms, that they understand it, and in the information that we upload, who they should talk to with questions. So we are planning on putting the employee handbook on there for all employees to review and check that they've received it with information about how to go back to it and who to talk to about questions. So it can be personalized. We can add our own videos with our own tests if we want to.
So it does create some efficiency for us too, because a lot of this training is done by Tricia and by some other folks as well. So having this online and being able to watch it on your phone frees up a lot of folks' time. All right, page 13, 4.2.2, provide budget engagement opportunities for various constituents and stakeholders to promote an understanding of and influence on the budget. Here our ideal state is to schedule meetings with teachers, parents, and community members. Budget updates will be posted on FCCPS websites and sent out to community and stakeholders via email with links to board docs and other areas where available. And then we really want to work on the budget documents so that they're easily understood and that there are regular updates out there for folks to see. There was a question, now an okay time to respond to your question, and I'll just share it with you. Or actually, do you want to share your question about that?
Sure.
Well, here I got it. And maybe my response will, because I don't have it right in front of me, but I asked Deidre to sort of look at your question, and it really was about distinguishing between the printout that we currently have when the budget is shown line by line by line by line, and looking at things in more categorical ways with some further information. So we really are starting to look at the line item budget, really feeling like it needs to be sufficiently descriptive so that people can really understand where money's being spent. So for example, there's a line for instructional wages, and that would be changed in our proposal with descriptions such as classroom teachers, ESOL teachers, gifted resource teachers, so you could see more specifically what categorically some of those dollars are being spent on. It would be a clear, I think, change from what we've done in the past, but you'd be able to see both the net change and a series, she says, a series of actions showing how we got there. The budget would also include enrollment information and include the number of positions that are assigned to each site, so you can look at things a little bit less globally perhaps than what you've seen, but also you could look at it globally. And have organizational charts in there and departments having goals, and then taking essentially what are the best ways to describe a budget based on the Government Financial Offices Association, or GFOIA, and then ASBO, which is the Association of School Business Offices, and trying to use those as templates for best practice in budget presentation. So the idea was to become a little bit more categorical in the look, so you could really see where is the money being spent by category. Does that make sense? Does that answer it?
So it does. I know, what my question related to was really, it goes to what Mr. Castillo said before about the mapping of the items in the work plan to costs. So generally around the budget, we as we get to the end, I think it's hard for me at least. I can't speak for other board members, but it can be difficult for me to figure out going through the line item budget and the other pieces, how much we're spending on different things. So I think about it as a programmatic budget, but that may not be a description that's fully applicable to schools. But what it's about is the ability to look at a budget and figure out where we're applying resources and how much each of the things we're doing sort of costs. So that can be tracked over time and decisions can be made. I think just putting figures on the work plan would be a big first step, but it would be very helpful to be able to have, as you say, some larger categories, like how much are we spending on our ESOL program? How much are we spending on our special education program? And of course, some costs are mixed, and that can be difficult to fix, but it would just be a helpful tool, at least for me, and I think the community, to understand more where we're spending and where all of the dollars go to, because there are typically a lot of questions around that. And all it's to an end of making sure that when we get into the budget process, that we have an efficient and clear way of making decisions and have all of the data that we want. We tend to go through this thing, I don't know if other people agree or disagree, but there's sort of there's almost a remedial education component each year when we go into the budget process, where we sort of say, here's what all of the things that are going on, and we kind of go through the budget. I'd like to be able to sort of have the baseline understood, and spend more time on what's the delta and where do we need to apply additional resources. So that may be more of a ramble and a long statement, but I think the categorization that you're talking about and the ease of looking at the line item budget would be a very good first step. If there's a way to aggregate those different pieces, so you could just do a mapping and extract out, for example, the ESOL teachers and the ESOL training and all of the different things that go to that, on either a school by school basis or on a program basis across all schools. I think that would be helpful.
Okay. Great.
Mr. Steve?
I guess my conception of this plan is maybe with respect to cost, maybe more incremental, like there maybe, the problem is some of the things may not, you may do things differently, but they may not cost something else if you're not doing if you're not doing IB, you'd be doing some other program, you'd be expending resources on that. And some of it is, I wonder, it's interesting, like how much are we spending on special education or ESOL? And at the same time, one of the plans in here is to give those skills to everybody in the division. So I suppose that training cost would be allocated. But if we're, I guess I'm a little, there seems to be a tension of presenting a budget that kind of silos things, even as we do things in a more integrated way. But I suppose budgetarily, you can still break that out. I think, I think one of the problems we have with the budget is everybody conflates what a budget is with what a shopping list is. They say, if you know the budget, well, tell me exactly what you're going to buy with it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the big sources of the disconnect with the budget, because it isn't a shopping list. So I think we can do what we can, but that will be a tale that is told every year.
And the spirit of the priorities really was to try to make the budget less opaque than anything. Not that it
is opaque.
Not that it is opaque, but to make it more clear. It's really to try to make it more understandable, quite frankly, than anything else. Because I've sat down with the budget with Deirdre, and we both had a lot of experience with budgets, and it's a little bit complex to try to understand, to walk into. So if we're struggling with it, others might be as well. So we just want to try to make it as clear as possible.
Mr. Ankuma?
Here's what my experience is, and I'm not perfect with the budget either, but let's be careful not to spend time trying to explain every single detail, because we never will.
That's a good point.
So, just my 2 cents.
All right, the last one I want to share is on page 15, just as an example. And it's in community engagement, and the strategy is to encourage and support opportunities for parent and citizen involvement. So 5.1.1 is to host quarterly community engagement events and families and community members, which are aligned to district priorities at each school site and district levels. That would be the principal or principal's designee and appropriate central office staff, that they would be inviting key stakeholders to get feedback on the work that they've been doing, and seek evidence of creative community outreach events to reach all of the members of the community. We want to start that as early as August, so they'll be able to talk a little bit about the triennial plan. So, so that's enough of watching the sausage get made. Let me stop there and just say, you know, there's a pretty significant number of strategies in here that go with the work, with the overarching priorities. And we had many more before, and I'm sort of the mind of if everything's important, nothing's important. And so we really did try to winnow down as best we could what was here and see where there were some interdependencies and see where we may be able to cross-pollinate some of these items and strategies. And I think we feel generally pretty good about where we are, but certainly want to get your feedback as well too. Now, I say that cautiously because I know that, well, I know all of you read this in advance and may have some feedback on it now, but I also want to open the window too for the next 2 weeks for you to provide us with some feedback before you actually go forward and adopt it in the September meeting. So that I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Noonan. All right, then we've had some questions. Are there additional questions that folks may have tonight? Mr. Lawrence?
Okay, following up on probably more rambling than even anybody else could do combined. Where in here is any talk about IB training specifically for teachers? We've had a lot of questions about, you know, we've got some training for some level, but we don't have enough for others, and we've been dinged on IB reviews. So do we have that specifically called out? I'm sure it's
Yes.
We do.
implied that it's under, but
Go ahead.
It's in 1.2.3, which is under student-centered teaching and learning. It's saying make sure that returning staff have received category 1, which is the initial IB training for new hires. And we want them to receive it, you know, within their first year, and then also to have funding available for category 2 and category 3 training, as well as to bring consultants in that will be information shared with all staff. So that's the training piece is right there in 1.2.3.
but
And
it
it
seemed like-
crosses 2 pages, just so.
right, but it seems like a lot of what we had criticism from the community on was the PYP, you know, elementary specifically. So this covers everything, because it just gives, again, categories that people may not understand, and, you know, they'll look at it. So I think we need to make it clear that, you know, this covers the elementary training that people were saying we were not meeting.
And this is for PYP, NYP, and DP. The category 1 training is the initial training talking about the program itself and how to implement the program. And then when you go into category 2 and category 3 training, it's more advanced and it gets to more specifics of the rubrics and the actual curriculum that's being developed.
So perhaps one of the things we can do is in parentheses somewhere put PYP, NYP, DP, just so that that's more clear.
Yeah, because the way you also throw in staff, you know, when I hear staff, I also think, okay, not just teachers, and I think for a lot of people, when you think of IB training, you really think teachers. So again, it's not that it's not here, it's just not as clear as I think it could be.
And for those official trainings, it typically is our teachers. When we bring in consultants, we do involve all of our paraprofessionals in those trainings. But typically when we go to trainings, whether it's in Maryland or in another state, it's typically our professional staff who attend those. Because they're the actual people who are implementing the program.
Okay, and we don't have any more certifications needed for a few years, right?
I mean, as far as going through reauthorization,
Right, yeah, sorry.
it's not until 2021. And our goal is to have, when they come back, to do all of our programs at the same time. So that we will be on the same schedule, because we now have an IB continuum. So we want to get that feedback. And the plan, if IB will agree, is to have them come and over 5 or 6 days to do all of our buildings, and then be able to provide us the feedback. We've already sent in.
All right, good. One thing, the category that's labeled evidence of effectiveness, ideal state, in some of the things, I think the ideal state is really gonna leap out at people and they're gonna think that's what they're getting, you know, like net carbon, you know, 0 net carbon footprint and things like that. I can't think of a better way to put it, because I know what you're getting at, which is how do you tell if it's working and where do you really wanna be, but I just think the ideal is always gonna be the better thing, so I'm just worried people will look at it and go, that isn't the measure of effectiveness, is do we have a net carbon zero school? So anyway, that's more a comment that doesn't really help because it's not constructive, but just a comment. And getting back to the talk about recruiting, do we have, and Justin asked about it to a certain extent, do we have the depth of support for the recruiting? Because, identifying candidates and going to job fairs, to me that's sort of the tip of the iceberg, but then, all the back end stuff that you've got to do with, security checks and everything else, to me that's the rest of the iceberg, and honestly that's the part that concerns me more, because I think, we're good enough that we're gonna have people who really wanna come here, and then you've got a whole lot of work to do on the back end to see, should we let them, and, that has to be done for a lot of people, and then offers go to very few, so. And I know I've said we need more central office help, and I think that's been raised enough, but I just wanna say that I think the recruiting focuses on the person as opposed to everything else that has to get done before you get to an offer.
Just in terms of a broader answer perhaps for tonight is one of the things that I'm leaning into right now is what is the structure in our central office?
Right.
And are we, if this is what our work is, are we organized to be able to do this work? And I'm not sure that we necessarily are organized for being able to do this work, and I'll just use the case in point of having the person who's in charge of human resources also in charge of instruction. That doesn't necessarily make sense to me because those are two really big full-time jobs. And so if there is a way to sort of pull those apart, I think there's some ways that we can get to your question and to Justin's point as well by realigning some resources internally to allow us to have a little bit more effectiveness around being able to handle some of these things.
Yeah, I know you're looking at it. I'm just,
Yeah.
I keep harping on sort of the non-sexy part, which is the, everything on the back end as opposed to
Yeah.
the final offer.
Yeah.
Nice. One thing I would like to see is if you could make these two into one. I mean, they really are one because this is this, but it kind of feels like they're two different things. And I would love it where people could just go to one and it would automatically take them and they wouldn't have to look at this one and then go, hold it, I saw this other one, is that the same thing? Because it is very well integrated, like it.
But these are, the fronts are basically that.
Well, no, that's my point. They are the same, but the way they're done, people would have to know them side by side to know that. So I'm just trying to make it simple so that people don't try to think, okay, well, I saw one triennial plan and then there's another one.
And I think part of this board or previous boards have wanted the one pager that would be easy for community members to be able to see. And then we've always had this that had the actual work, but this does mirror this.
We sort of talked about it as a bite, a snack, and a meal, and sort of this is your bite. The priorities of the bite, the strategies are the snack, and then if you really want the whole meal, that's what it is. But I think I can work with John. John was back there nodding his head like, I think I can figure this out. So we can certainly look at how we might be able to put this together and hot link this in a way. I don't know. We can take a look
that's
at it.
just packaging. It's just,
Yeah.
but if people can know they have one document to look at as opposed to wondering if they're two different documents, it just cuts
Yeah.
down on possible confusion.
Well, but to follow up on that, I mean, usually we've had a work plan for the year and then the triennial plan.
So,
So,
are you asking him if we're going with that?
Well, that's
This
what
is
that's
the
what we've got.
so this is, but,
This is
This
the
is-
triennial plan. This is the work plan.
but what, I mean, this year plan, what's this year plan? Are we gonna do this for 3 years and adjust?
Well, the
And
idea.
I'm not saying that that's a
Yeah.
bad thing necessarily.
No, the idea was to, and that maybe I wasn't really clear about. The reason that we put the color codings in here were because we knew that some of these things that were yellow and red are gonna take us longer than 1 year. So the way that we approached this was, this is 3 years of work, what we're sharing with you. So if it's green, we're gonna continue doing it the way that we've been doing it, or with some tweaking. If it's yellow, you'll see completion dates on the far right-hand side that says, okay, we're gonna get this done by June of 19, for example. And then another one like 1.4.2, training all of us in special populations with research-based practices. Our completion date is 2020. We want to make sure that in 3 years, everybody's got it. So this really was meant to be a 3-year working plan.
Okay, so personally, I think this is great. This is the first time I see this, and I can align it with that. As far as I'm concerned, this is an executive summary, and this is the meat and potatoes of this. It makes perfect sense, and when you look at the categories, you see, and to help Mr. Lawrence, I would make a suggestion that where you see evidence of effectiveness, current state, and ideal state, maybe you can put where we are, where we want to be underneath it, without changing anything. It will help, you know, where we are, right underneath current state, where we want to be, ideal state. That would make it more simpler for some folks. And it will speak to Mr. Lawrence's point. I like the multi-year approach because I think we're a little too reactive, and we never accept that things, to your point, Dr. Noonan, things go more than 1 year. So this I think just spells out the fact that when we start something, here we are asking about kids going to kindergarten early, and are we monitoring them? None of these things take 12 months. They go way beyond. So I think this is great. So I'll check that in the summary. And I think I like the alignment. And again, back to my point about trying to oversimplify stuff that we shouldn't really be doing. I mean, this matches this, and so I don't know how much more simpler we make it. You know, and frankly, anyway, so that's my point. I think it's simple. If you spend 5 seconds looking at it, you see that it matches. And I think your time is better used doing other things. This is good enough. And to Mr. Justin's famous expression, let's not make the perfect be the enemy of the good. Thank you. My 2 cents.
Yeah, just one more question. On 15, 5.2.1, well actually on page 16, the continuation, where it just talks about loss of parent liaison with ties to the community. It's sort of an odd thing to have in there.
Which one was it?
5.2.1, so it's, yeah.
Oh, that was a current state. Yeah, we had, yeah, that's a little bit of an editorial, isn't it?
It's just, it seems extremely significant and
last
it's
sentence.
not explained. So it just,
Yeah, we lost our parent liaison that had been here for a long time, who also happens to live in the community. I think that's what the point of it was, but I'm not sure that it necessarily should be in here. We can look at it.
And it's advertised to replace that individual, but we're having a difficult time because it is a part-time position. Finding someone.
okay, that actually explains it
Not
better.
actually
When
lost, I guess the person left the division.
Well, no, when.
It's not gone forever, I think.
No, but the way I read this was, it was a parent who was a liaison, which is why it made no sense. Now that you've explained that, it makes more sense, but it sounded like we had a parent who was identified as a liaison. Like we have some parents who are identified as, school liaisons for PTAs or the foundation and things like that. So maybe that's just my lack of English, but that explains it, because I couldn't
Maybe
understand
we'll
it.
add FCCPS, employee parent liaison.
Yeah, just because to me, parent is what stood out, so that's why I got confused. So, thank you.
Mr. Castillo?
So just a couple of questions. One of the things, and I'll channel Mr. Writing a little bit here, he's talked about stretch goals, and also, if you, to your point, Dr. Newman, about focusing on everything, you're not focusing on anything. There is a lot here, and so what are the 3 most important things to us?
Yeah.
I think it would be a good question to ask and answer. And, part of that is what are we reluctantly choosing not to do because we can't do everything. We did that on the budget a little bit, here, the unmet needs. And it might be nice to know what ended up on the cutting room floor in terms of this document. Or what are we going to be doing differently? It'd be good to see some of that.
Can I answer?
Absolutely.
The next piece that we're going to talk about tonight in the work session is my evaluation. And as part of my evaluation, I'm going to present to you the idea of developing 3 to 5 goals for the superintendent that would become my focus with the staff and with the faculty for the year. My expectation is that those 3 to 5 will again link directly to this, and my hope is that those 3 to 5 become those things that we all can collectively work on as those that we would deem as most important as part of this. So that's the plan anyway.
Okay, fair enough, that's good. I would say on 1.4.6, small class sizes, I would not put that as green. I'd say that as yellow, maybe red. Because the current state basically says it is not green. I guess that's it.
I'm going to respond to your.
If you wait one second.
Absolutely.
I'll ask them in a second. I wanted to see if Ms. Ward had any questions. Thank you. So let me start. Bye, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I think the work that you and the whole staff have done on the work plan is spectacular. As Mr. Ankuma said, it is wonderful and so easy to consume, given all of the content. It's clear that a lot of work and great thought went into it. I find the color codes very helpful and sort of the where we are, where we want to be. I would say the evidence of effectiveness I actually kind of like. That's the way I would sort of think about it. But if there's a way to make it more simple, I'm certainly not going to argue over the headings of columns. But it's really helpful to be able to look at that. I also think that the document is multi-year. It is still a one-year work plan, but it's not just a one-year work plan. So some of the items clearly go beyond, and I think it's particularly helpful to say, one could go through and code the ones that will all be done in 1 year, but most of these things are going to continue. Where they're one-year goals, it'll be clear. And so I think having a plan that tells you what you're going to be doing the year that also looks out is a great way to look at things, and an enhancement to what our process is. In terms of presentation, I think, like on the web, as you suggest, Dr. Noonan, we could hyperlink it so that it kind of goes through the same. My personal view would be that it's important to keep a one-pager for people in paper. It ought to be clear that it's associated with, and that it maps exactly to the work plan. But I think there are going to be a lot of people, for whom hyperlinks are confusing still. And handing out a one-pager to people who just want to know the one-pager, if they want the bite, then I think that's a really good thing to be able to do. Before getting into the specific questions, the last thing I want to say is you kind of presaged what I was going to say. I think the idea of having 3 to 5 key goals for you that map exactly to this plan and tell us what our top items are is perfect, right? Because that says our superintendent's evaluation goals are aligned with what our strategic plan and work plan are. And if they're the top set of goals, then it all maps together and fits in a way so that everything we do is aligned with the same outcomes. And that is really, I think, the goal of any strategic planning process. So I think that's one of them. The 2 specific questions I had were, one, the last work plan had a proposal to revamp the teacher evaluation process by June of 2017. And that's not in this plan, so I wanted to see if that had been completed or deprioritized or where we were on that first.
I'm going to
Yes, we put a group together December of 2016, and from December till spring, we worked with the group to revise, tweak our evaluation system. The main thing that came out of it is that we have fewer indicators. We combined some things so that it wasn't such a cumbersome document for both administrators and teachers. As we got approval last year to go on the rotation of every 3 years for our tenured staff, we will continue to do that for next year. But every teacher will set goals each and every year, and our goal will be tied to, again, the triennial and strategic plan. And that's what we've been working with our administrators on. So everything that we do as administrators, we're talking about making sure that it goes back to this. But yes, we have revamped that, and actually tomorrow we'll be rolling it out and putting it into the system that we have, Edivate, which we've had the last few years.
Awesome. So this is a great example of a work plan item that is complete and done, and we don't have to have another. The other item, maybe a specialty concern of mine, but there was some specific attention around information security or cybersecurity in the last, both the priorities document and the work plan. There's nothing at all that I could find about information security or cybersecurity, even in the work plan itself. And it concerns me a little bit because there is stuff about physical security. We do need to be concerned about the privacy of our students and things like online safety. So I'd only suggest that we consider whether there ought to be something in the work plan about it, if for no other reason than to make sure that we don't lose sight of that because it's not in the work plan.
I'll take that back.
Could I follow up to that?
Mr. Kazan?
As my kids would say, retweet. It might be that this is more of a quarterly housekeeping thing for us as a board to be, putting our finger on the pulse. But I do think it is good to keep that issue top of mind in some fashion.
And we're looking at it right here and thinking 3.12, which is enhanced security protocols and procedures. And there we talk about surveillance camera, access control, security staff, but perhaps it's a good place to put cyber as well. So
Yeah.
we certainly can figure out where to put it.
And if I can echo Mr. Reininger's thing, I was never fully satisfied with the study that was done a couple of years ago.
Okay.
It was more of a network thing, whereas what we're really looking at is what Mr. Reininger referred to as the ability to, for me, I want to see more about, can the systems be hacked? Do we have backup? Do we have redundancy? It still concerns me that our system sits in the high school and the backup is in the basement of the middle school. Well,
And at Tyson's.
and at Tyson.
I did clarify that.
This is new information to me.
Yeah.
That was something we didn't know about. So that's a little more comforting, but that's the kind of information that I think we ought to know about, or at least know that if there's a cyber attack, what protections do we have, that sort of thing. So
Just to bring everybody into the loop, since I mentioned it, at the retreat the other day, Mr. Ankuma asked me to ask our folks about the redundancy issues around our server and the like. I did meet with Dang. Currently, we have it's actually not Tyson's, it's Merrifield.
Yeah.
We have a backup server over at Merrifield where we pay for space. We're going to consider the option of moving everything to the cloud, though, for cost purposes and for ease of use, as opposed to continuing to maintain a cage over in Merrifield. I'll bring that to you when we get closer. But it is backed up. There's good redundancy.
I'll defer to the expert.
But your point is well made about the cyber security and security of our student data systems as well.
Mr.
I
Castillo?
just had one last thing. One of the things that isn't in the work plan that I think would be a good one to think about in some form or fashion, and that is changing FCCPS into a learning institution, and maybe that's baked into all this, but saying it explicitly somewhere in some fashion would be good.
What does that mean?
It means that everybody, school board, staff, teachers, administration, continues the process of development, building, not being static. So it's part of the constant growth.
I guess I thought that was already there.
Any other questions? A little bit of, we got some pretty good feedback, and we have a 2 weeks before we adopt this, so please, if you have any other questions or comments, please make sure you get them to the staff prior to our September 12th meeting where this will be adopted.
So my immediate next steps, just for the good of the group and for those present, is that between now and September 12th, I'm going to make every effort I can to get out in the community at least twice to, as I've mentioned before, maybe sit at a coffee shop, maybe be somewhere and have this along with the one pager. So if people want to come, and I'll put it out, we'll put it up on the website, we'll put it up on Twitter. So if anybody wants to come and meet and talk about this before you adopt it on the 12th, we'll put something out there for people to have that opportunity. I know that that's not ideal. But again, this is a 1.5, not a 2.0 modification from last year's strategic plan or triennial plan. So that's the plan.
Ms.
Sorry,
Lawrence?
just one idea, since, you know, it is summer and now we're into the second week of August. I mean, this is important enough, should you consider sending it out to the morning announcements group? I mean, people have gotten nothing since, you know, the third week of June. If you really want people to know this is out there, I mean, that's a group that would want to know, so.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Mr. Brett and I have talked about the use of that in the summer because we don't want to oversaturate, and I think people really like it. But perhaps that's something we can look at. So let me talk with Mr. Brett and see.
Yeah, I mean, I think one email over the summer about our triennial plan for the next 3 years would not bother anyone. They'll either be happy to get it or they'll be on vacation and they'll see it when they get back. But I just think it would be good. We've had trouble before, and planning commission and council and others for doing things in during the summer. With us, it's different with schools. They're doing things in summer, doing things in August, and then people come back and they say, "Oh, you did it in August on purpose." So I just think going the extra step would be appreciated.
Thank you very much. Last agenda item for this evening is the superintendent evaluation instrument.
Let me get a drink of water here. Sure. That's fine. All right, so in your board materials for this evening, you have a document that says City of Falls Church Superintendent Annual Evaluation Instrument. Let me sort of back up just a little bit and say that when you all hired me, it was determined that I would have up to 3 months to figure out what the evaluation instrument was going to be to present to you as an option for the evaluation of the superintendent. I did work with a number of different superintendents from around the state, two from the northern region, one from Tidewater, another from Southside, and another in the Roanoke area, around what their evaluations look like. And I also spoke with Dr. Steve Staples about evaluation. And then quite honestly, I pulled my evaluation that I've been using for the last 5 years. And where I landed in terms of the evaluation process is something that's very, very consistent with what the state of Virginia has been using for their superintendents, by and large across the Commonwealth. And for those of you that have perhaps attended a VSBA Superintendent's Evaluation Workshop, you'll see that this looks very familiar to you. So the change happened about 4 years ago. The state adopted a new Superintendent's Evaluation Instrument, and the idea was to bring alignment to what how principals and how teachers are evaluated, so that all teachers, principals, and superintendents are evaluated the same way. What you'll see tonight are 7 standards, and underneath each of those 7 standards are some indicators of success. There's an opportunity for a superintendent to write some goals associated with their particular evaluation, and then to get some feedback at mid-year and also get some feedback at the end of the year. This, just to share with you very personally, this evaluation instrument has been sufficient for me for the last 5 years with my last board, but I also am open to looking at things a little bit differently, considering you are a different board than I've worked with in the past. So let me walk through this with you, if I may. I did put a proposed timeline on the very top sheet of that. And so it's August of 17, and tonight I'm proposing to you an evaluation instrument to use potentially for the evaluation of me. If this is acceptable to you with any tweaks or any feedback or changes, then I would ask that in September I have an opportunity to again present the evaluation instrument, but to do it publicly at a regular meeting as an action item. And then also in that same evening present to you some proposed goals that again would be aligned to the strategic plan that would be put out there as 3 to 5 goals that we'd like to work on very specifically this year as part of the superintendent's evaluation. In January of 18, we would go through a process where I could report at mid-year the progress towards those goals and give you an update of where we are. And then in May of 18, report again on those goals at a regular meeting. That would be more of, so the January would be sort of a formative assessment, if you will, versus a summative assessment, which perhaps would happen in May. And then in June, you all would do a summative evaluation of me. So if you flip over the first page, you'll see, it's actually page 2 in your document. It does give a template that can be used for the goal. And it does speak to asking us to, as superintendents, to identify which of the 7 standards the particular goal is associated with. So you'll see mission, vision, and goals is standard 1, planning and assessment is standard 2, instructional leadership is standard 3, and so on and so forth. I would write the goal. I would give you some indicators of success of that goal. We would do a mid-year assessment and an evidence to date on that when we did the mid-year. If you turn over to page 3, this is sort of getting to the meat and potatoes, if you will, Mr. Ankuba, of the evaluation itself. The meat and potatoes is where you begin to see the standards by performance indicator and performance indicator. So performance standard 1 is mission, vision, and goals. And it very specifically says that the superintendent works with the local school board to formulate and implement the school division's mission, vision, and goals to promote student academic progress. This is boilerplate language that comes from the state of Virginia. And then the performance indicators underneath this are selected from a core group of indicators that are available to select from. And I selected 4 that seem to make the most sense, but I would certainly open that up to you if you decided that those weren't the right 4 and you wanted me to focus on some other things. So in addition to the materials that you have in front of you, you have the entire state of Virginia evaluation document. And as you move through that document towards the end, it will show all of the different indicators, performance indicators that are associated with each of these standards. So for example, in standard 1, you would see promoting a climate of mutual respect, trust, and professionalism with school board and staff, supporting and enforcing all school board policies and informing all constituents of changes to those policies, function as the primary leader for the school division, seeking out and relying on support from staff as necessary when advising the school board, and then delegating authority and responsibility to other employees as needed to, as opportunities arise. Based on our conversations that we've had previously about being able to interface with the community in a very positive and powerful way, in addition, seeking out and relying on advice of others and building capacity in the staff, these indicators seem to make the most sense for standard 1. And then at the bottom, you'll see a rubric, if you will, of exemplary, proficient, developing, or needs improvement, or unacceptable. My goal would be to get to the exemplary level in each of these different goal areas. And so if I were in the exemplary level, it would say the superintendent establishes a highly productive relationship with the school board to formulate and implement the division's mission, vision, and goals to promote student progress. So that's again, sort of the template for how this works. If you turn over to the next page, you'll see standard 2 is planning and assessment. There are 3 indicators that I selected there, and then the rubric at the bottom changes to match up with what the planning and assessment performance standard says. Page 5 is around instructional leadership. 6 is organizational safety. leadership and safety. Page 7 is communications and community relations. Page 8 is professionalism. And then the last page is on division-wide student academic progress. So if you flip over to page 10, then what ends up happening is you as a school board, I presume, would each individually make your ratings, or you could select to do your ratings together on each of these indicators, or each of these standards and indicators, and then you would come together and you would give me one overall evaluative summary that would be a summative assessment, and identify whether or not I've been able to do all of those things in an exemplary fashion of proficiency, developing, needing assessment, or unacceptable. Or you could also recommend for targeted growth, and that would be where we would go from there. And then the last piece of this that I wanted to share is that on page 12, there is an opportunity for a superintendent's evaluation to come also with a self-evaluation. So as you are moving into your summative assessment, one of the things that I would like to do is to be able to provide you with some evidence of my performance, and this is where that evidence would come from, where I would present it to you, would be within this self-evaluation form and format. So that's a lot of information, perhaps, to digest, but the big takeaways here are that this is a fairly standard boilerplate evaluation instrument that's used widely across the state. There is some flexibility in the indicators. If you're not excited about those indicators, we can certainly look at others and even write our own if we like. But I kind of like the idea of using those that are already established because it does give me then an opportunity to benchmark against other superintendents across the state. And then there's also the timeline on the front page. So with that, Mr. Chair, I will turn it over for any questions, thoughts, feedback. And again, my hope is that in the September meeting, you guys will adopt this instrument or something based on the modifications that we make, and that night I will present to you some goals.
Thank you very much, Dr. Newman. Are there any questions? Mr. Lawrence?
Two things. First, you said you were going to take some things from the work plan or the triennial plan, strategic plan, and put those into here, right? Okay. Because what I see in here, and I think we all did the workshop about superintendent evaluation, the changeover. What I don't like about this, I mean, I like the idea overall. What I don't like is there's too much Virginia in here and not enough Falls Church. So I would like to see more things that are specific to us as opposed to, generically determined by the SBA. So I would just look forward to see what you're going to bring us from the strategic plan to say, this is what you specifically told me to do here that I think I should be evaluated on. So that's, and you already said you were going to do that. My second question is, and this is something we've always struggled with, which is why we actually ended up doing evaluations later than June normally. How in June will you have the actual information you need to be evaluated on academic progress? Because that's supposed to be what, up to 40% of the evaluation when the BSBA?
It is completely up to you all how you want to weight these categories. With our teacher evaluation, it is at 40%. It doesn't necessarily have to be 40% for superintendents. In fact, most of the superintendents around the state are not necessarily at that 40%. I think it's some other mix. And I could pull some of that information right now.
Right, but even if it's less, I mean...
But your question's well taken. When do we get the SOL results? For example, we get it in August.
Well, so, I mean...
Or IB.
SOL so badly, that'd be a better example. But yeah, I mean, the idea is, we're here for the kids need to make progress. Mm-hmm. How can we have that progress well evaluated in June when either, the school year just ended June 18th next year? Mm-hmm. So how do we really factor that in? I mean, we've struggled with it before, and that's, like I said, that's one reason we actually delayed. We would evaluate in August, one time in September, I think. So if you can think of a way to do that, it's just academic, achievement is incredibly important. So how do we give it, the rigor it's due? And you don't have to answer that now, but that is something that's huge.
Mr. Stevens?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Couple of thoughts. I agree with Mr. Lawrence. I wrote down, what are the unique factors regarding Falls Church? I guess it's sort of it's a wonderful life moment. How will we know what Falls Church would have been like if you hadn't come here? The kind of question with the evaluation. Dr. Noonan, could you explain the formative versus summative evaluation distinction?
Sure. Let me use an analogy. Formative is to physical exam,
Okay.
as summative is to autopsy. Both give you information, but there's only one you can do anything about, right? So what I would see as a formative assessment would be information that you want to share with me that's going to help me get better before we get to the summative, where I'm already in trouble. Or not, if they're so inclined.
We can,
Ouch.
So
The
we
high
can-
of the retreat is over.
so we can build on that. I would suggest, one of the things that I think we all in retrospect chafe at is delivering feedback in a more real-time manner, and I think semi-annually probably isn't enough. I don't know whether quarterly is enough, or just an occasional "how am I doing?" I don't know, but I think more often than semi-annually would be good. In terms of the weighting, I mean, just between us chickens, what do you think about this whole rating process, and how does it really measure who you are and what you're doing? Because I'm sure systematically, if you looked around Virginia, we're not grading on a bell curve here, right? Everybody's above average, or I don't know how many exemplaries we have. How do we really make this a useful instrument? I mean, we can not use it well and make everybody look good, or I mean, what's the real way we can get value out of this? Because I must say, I think it's of questionable utility to some.
That's a really an interesting and somewhat hard question to answer, because I think it speaks to not only superintendent evaluation but principal evaluation and teacher evaluation. We really want our students to perform, and we want to employ those practices by which we're going to get the most out of our kids, and that doesn't always get measured in a teacher evaluation, or it doesn't always get measured in a superintendent's evaluation. So I think the utility perhaps of this would be more routine feedback around these particular big ideas of standards, and maybe looking at modifying in some way these indicators to be more aligned and more uniquely Falls Church. I don't know. Because if I were to crosswalk, I wrote on here, crosswalk indicators with the triennial plan. So if I were to take the triennial plan and look under, which of those go to mission, vision, values, and goals, are there some sub-bullets that are under mission, vision, and values and goals that could become then indicators of success? I don't know. I think this document's more useful to us in terms of my evaluation in some ways than this will be, but I also think that this has important progress indicators too. Like you want me to promote a climate of mutual respect, trust, and professionalism with you all and the staff. So I don't know that I can get away from some of these things.
Yeah, and
Probably
I agree.
not articulating very well, but
No, I agree. I think a lot of this stuff is it's the only problem arises when you're not doing it, which most of this stuff I think you're going to do.
that's the plan.
And so some of this is I do think that this might be more telling. And I guess the last question, so we don't stay here all night, is given where you are now, how will this year be different from subsequent years in terms of what's reasonable to ask of you this year? Because you're coming in not in full control of this situation. You've got a good bit of runway, but what's, to Mr. Lawrence's point about the student results and other things, is there any adjustment we should make for this year?
Well, that's a good question also. This is not just a superintendent's evaluation. This is really and I know they don't like hearing this, but this is really a staff evaluation also. So when I think about putting together these goals, I want to be held accountable to those goals. I don't think I have any runway, frankly. I think I hit the ground and it was a touch and go. And so I guess all of that to say that I think whatever I put in here, I want to be able to be held accountable to that. And if it's not rigorous enough, I want the feedback from you to say, it's not quite there yet, or if it looks too rigorous and you feel like you need me to back it down a little bit, that's fine too. But I've got great people that I work with every single day that are going to help me pull together the work around these goals, and I rely heavily on them. And I think we can do just about anything.
Besides, you have your 6-week honeymoon anyway.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Ingham, any questions?
No, that's thanks.
Ms. Ward? Mr. Reiniger?
Thank you. First, thank you, Dr. Nin, for the great job you did on this. I maybe a slightly different cut on what Mr. Lawrence and Mr. Castillo were saying. I actually would not spend a lot of time customizing the performance indicators. And the reason for that is, I think we need to customize, but I think it's in the goals, I should say, which I think one of the things Mr. Castillo was getting at. In general, I think your point about being able to do normative comparisons is very valuable. A lot of work went into the creation of this document, and I don't think we are going to pick, performance standards and performance indicators better on average than the state of Virginia does. A lot more people with a lot more experience than we have went into doing this. And in my experience, the instrument really doesn't matter all that much for those sorts of things because, as long as you've got the categories right, we're going to have a better sense of how you're doing working with the community and working with the faculty and those sorts of things. I think then would be more deeply informed by the performance indicators. So I think sticking with a norm and a form that we use is the whole reason why we're going to VSBA policies generally. We may be special in some ways, but I don't think we're going to identify our specialness by the performance indicators we use. That said, I have one slight comment, which is on performance standard 4, organizational leadership and safety. I don't think any of the performance indicators deal with safety. So I make sure that we select one that's got that element in it because that's a matter of a lot of concern to both the board and the community, and I know to you as well. So I do something to that. The key point, I think, is going to be where the specialness comes in are what are those goals that you haven't written yet, or at least you haven't drafted for us to look at, which are the 3 to 5 things or 6 things or whatever it is on the blank first page of this, which are all to map to the document that people have already talked about, the strategic plan and the work plan. I think those are the things, because a board of people who have other jobs, we're going to need to look on a fairly, I think, limited category of things. And if we focus on doing 3 to 5 things, we're going to be much more effective than focusing on 50 things. So I think that's a really important list. And to that end, I'd say I might suggest a change in the timeline. You say you're going to bring us the proposed goals at a meeting and we'll go through them. I think that might be something we'd want to do in a work session and then take to a meeting for the simple reason that, I think picking those 3 to 5 things, what we're really going to measure, making sure they map to the work plan, and that we're going to evaluate you on them, is probably one of our most important functions. And so I'd like to devote a lot of time to that rather than maybe necessarily looking at it at the next full meeting of the board. On the point raised about when to do the evaluation that Mr. Lawrence talked about, not having been through that process, I'm not sure that I've got a good answer on that. I will say that personally, I'm a lot less interested than in SOL test results than I think I'm interested in other things like graduation rate and progress within cohorts. Although some of that is the best evidence we've got is probably SOL tests. So your bare passage rates are probably not as important to me. If there's ways to get that data before, then I'm fine with that. But I'm not over the log in any particular way on when the evaluation gets done.
So, you haven't had a chance to weigh in yet. I just want to make sure that I'm doing what you all want me to do. And one of the things that I heard that sort of actually makes sense to me is moving the proposed goals to either the September work session or the October work session. I don't want to wait too long because I think that we would lose. We're going to continue. We're going to work on some things. So what if we did the goals in the September work session and they were adopted in the October meeting? Or maybe they don't need to be adopted officially. Maybe I could just get the will of the board, are these the goals we want to go with, yes or no, and everybody feel good about it. Because I would like your input. I mean, I think that September work session would give us a chance to really kind of move through them.
Are you talking overall for the adoption of the instrument?
I still think you should adopt the instrument in the September meeting, but I could bring the goals 2 weeks later to the work session. We could have a good working meeting about what those would look like, because when I get to the indicators, I want to make sure that the indicators of success around those goals are reflective of what you value also. And then if we can walk away from that work session feeling good about what we've got, then maybe we're good to go. So that's one thing. The second thing is I'll take a look at the indicators to see if there's any place that we can sort of figure out if there's a way to Falls Church it or not. But what I'm hearing is that the customization really happens in the goals, and I'm good with that if that's okay with everybody. I just want to get some direction from all of you, just in terms of is everybody feeling good about that, really sort of customizing that goal piece more so than the indicators. Mr. Lawrence?
Yeah, no, I didn't want you to go in and try to customize, 3,700 indicators.
Yeah.
We've got to do this because of the SBA. So what we did when they first set it up, they had their 7 categories, we had our 4 pillars. So what we did was we evaluated under their categories, and then we also did our pillars. So yeah, I would add on to it rather than spend a lot of time changing theirs, just because then I think our priorities would get a bit buried and drowned.
Okay. And then making sure that I select an indicator that actually speaks to safety, and that safety, organizational leadership and safety is important. Okay. Mr. Steele?
Yeah, I guess, I hate this analogy, but it's kind of like,
It doesn't involve corpses, it's
no, it's sort of like you're the new coach, and it pains me to say this, of the New England Patriots. But a very high-performing organization, let's say.
Right.
And I think a lot of the VSBA things, to Mr. Reidinger's point, is just, a lot of it's just blocking and tackling. I think with the goals, it's sort of, putting your mark on the division in a positive way those goals will be taking it to the next level. That's the piece. And meanwhile, you've got to do the blocking and tackling. So I do think that kind of hybridized vision is a working paradigm. I would say I'd rather get the goals nailed down sooner rather than later, because obviously school will be in session, so we don't want to sit around till November.
We're working on it now, my blind spot is that sometimes, and I'll just be honest with you, that as I'm thinking about these goals, they're very focused on instruction. And
As
because
they
that's,
should be.
because that's where we sit, but I also recognize that we also have buildings, and we have transportation, and we have food services, and we've got legal, and we've got everything else. So I wanna try to balance as best I can, but I would share with the board, I'm likely to come in with more heavily loaded goals around instruction and student outcomes.
And real quick on mine, I agree with that, looking at the goals, and I'm okay with, as Mr. Seal suggests, not going too late into it, but if you want to develop those and bring those to a work session, and we can discuss them a little bit more at length then, and then we can decide whether it's something we want to bring back for a formal adoption, or if it's something that we can agree to at work session to move forward with those in agreement there. I think that would be fine. I do, just generally looking at the instrument that you have put forward, I think it's pretty straightforward. I think it covers a lot of what we want to be able to evaluate you on. And it is right that we, those 2 times a year is sometimes challenging, but I think from time to time of talking with the board members and opportunities at leadership meetings that will bring things to your attention that may come up amongst us, and they are shared with Mr. Reininger and myself, or whomever board chair and vice chair are at the time, and bringing those to your attention so that at least a little bit more regular basis you kind of have some immediate kind of evaluation and critiques of things that we may want you to work on then, helps along with the more formal kind of mid-year and end of year type of evaluation. But yeah, I think we're at a good point there, and I think if folks have other, looking through this little, Mr. Lawrence? Yes.
Oh, no, finish.
Oh, if other folks have other comments or suggestions for this before the September meeting, please make sure to give those to Dr. Lee.
Okay, just 2 quick things. One, back on the academic progress, my main focus is, you said one of your big focuses is going to be special populations. And let's face it, they're the ones, and I hate SOL scores, I don't want to base anything on, but those populations would do the worst. So if you have somebody who, comes in as an ELL student, and they come in as a 1, and by the end of the year they're a 3, that's huge. They probably still failed a bunch of SOLs. So that's why I would really like, you to explain how we work in the academic achievement, because the special populations are going to have a lot more data and need a lot more rigor to understand what we've been doing, rather than just, gen ed at the end of the year, and you sort of do a quick data scan. So that's my big concern there is, how we track end of year evaluation with having enough time for that. But secondly, in terms of interim reviews, how have you had those done in the past, and how did it work out? We started about 3 years ago doing a mid-year review, and the first time it was kind of odd. I mean, we're sitting around, it's middle of the year, we don't have a budget, we don't have grades, we really didn't have a whole lot of anything, and we're trying to figure out, okay, how are you doing? I mean, it was kind of odd. It was a good session, but it was, certainly not really a review. It was more just a check-in. So I'm curious as to how you've done it before.
My experience with this instrument doing the mid-year has been usually in the February timeframe, and it's typically a presentation by me to the board about where I see my progress on these goals. It's more of a presentation than it is an appraisal, and then I would ask for feedback. Do you see it the way I see it? If not, let's talk about it. Are there things that you think I should be doing that I'm not doing with respect to these particular areas that you feel like I could get better at in growth? But it's just very conversational, and it isn't a formal mid-year. There's nothing that's really written out of that except what I would share with you, just to say, here's where I see the progress towards these goals or in these indicators.
Okay, I mean, it would really be going through the strategic plan and what you had set for that year. I mean, that's what it turned into for us, where it came down to, the work plan got, red, yellow, green, as to where it stood at that point with the idea that everything got to be green at the end. Okay, alright, that makes complete sense.
And one thing, just not to push back directly, but I would say in my last division, one of the things I'm most proud of is our ELL kids actually outperformed our general ed kids on the SOLs in the aggregate. So,
Good.
Well, there's your goal.
so that,
Yeah.
yeah, it was a very positive thing. And I don't want to, I would really guard against sort of using WIDA levels as indicators of success. So if they come in as a 1 or a 3, there's too many variables in that. But I hear what you're saying about the data and what it is. It's just
Right, it's just
tricky.
there's so many more moving parts to really understand what progress was made. It's not just a grade at the end of the year, it's not the SOL, it just takes more time and effort on our part, which means it takes a lot more time and effort on your part.
Sure, absolutely.
Sorry, but you know, it occurs to me, one of the things that we, I think, have to remind ourselves of is there's one of you and there's several hundred other people in the division. And so one of the things that I think you could show us progress and success is just to tell us about what's going on in the division. And as you're pushing down responsibility and training for greater responsibility, people in various buildings, that would be really good to know that part of your work, because it isn't, you alone aren't gonna get anything done, so we need to be mindful of that.
Yeah, I'm only as good as the people that are around me. So, thanks.
Anything else? Just wanted to just publicly thank Dr. Noonan, Ms. Goodell, and those who helped with putting the retreat on last Friday. I thought it was very productive. We had a good opportunity for the board members who were able to attend. It's good for us to kind of get together and have good conversation back and forth with the board members as well as Dr. Noonan. Kind of that opportunity for him to really ask us questions of expectations so that he can kind of know where our thinking is, and then we could do the same with him. So it was I think a good, productive time, and timely before school gets started here in the next couple of weeks. So I just want to thank both of you all and anyone else who helped with the staff that helped put that on. It was, I thought, a good and productive time for us on Friday.
It just occurred to me that Mr. Lawrence and Ms. Gill were not here. I believe, from what I heard, that
I think they're
they
going
would
to
be willing
provide.
to do a kind of follow-up.
Yeah, I think be in touch with them and follow
Yeah.
up with them. I think they were willing to do that, so I think
But
we'll
I
just
would,
be in touch.
yeah, I would echo your praise. I thought that was a really valuable exercise. I've been thinking about it, and thank you and Mr. Reidinger for pushing that. And I thought it was great that we had some school board candidates as well, so I think it was a very positive thing. So thanks to everybody as well.
And with that, we stand adjourned. Thank you all
Thanks
very
very
much.
much.